Today, we are joined by one of the greats, NIKLAS ZENNSTRÖM, who's here to talk to us about the state of European technology. NIKLAS really needs no introduction at all. He is the founder of SKYPE and ATOMICO, two organizations that have laid the groundwork for many of the great European tech companies that we have had the fortune of working with or backing. He is joined by our SAHAR MEGHANI, a partner of the Visionaries Growth Fund, and I will hand it over to the two of them to begin their discussion.
Thank you, Bella. NIKLAS, welcome to Visionaries Unplugged. You're one of the biggest champions of tech in Europe and one of our proudest success stories.
Yeah.
I think of you as the godfather of European tech, so I'm really excited to be here with you today. We only have 15 minutes, so I'd love to jump straight in.
Sure.
When you think about NIKLAS, the founder, what did it take to build a multi-billion-dollar business back when you were building SKYPE? And what does it take to do that now?
Yeah, sure. So you know what? Last weekend we celebrated 20 years of SKYPE since the launch. So we had a big reunion in Tallinn, a few hundred people, and just a trip down memory lane. The reality back then was that the ecosystem, if you would get like everyone in venture, everyone in startups in the whole of Europe, it would be like half of these people. There was really no ecosystem. There was no other entrepreneurs to learn from who've done it before. So I think what was required was just tenacity and not giving up and just going for it. But also timing is everything. We were very fortunate. There was a lot of things happening at the right time.
I mean, a lot has happened in European tech since when you started SKYPE. What do you think, what advice do you have for founders that are trying to build these businesses now? How is it different, and how should they be thinking?
Yeah, a lot of things have happened. $3 trillion has been created of value in European tech. I think the best advice is just to learn from others and to just, seek out other entrepreneurs who've done it before, and also to because there are others who have similar problems that you've had. But I think it's just about having a vision and having a lot of grit and going for it.
Yes. So on a related note, you've recently spoken a lot about the idea of building resilience in Europe, this idea that the European ecosystem has to learn to embrace failure.
Yeah.
Why is this so important to you?
Yeah. So I think, when we started ATOMICO in 2006, I spoke a lot about fear of failure, and we shouldn't be so fear of failure, because that's the startup journey, the journey of entrepreneurs, the journey of startup investors, is that a lot of things don't work out. And we used to have a culture in Europe that you shouldn't go out and take risks, you shouldn't fail, because it's not good for your CV. I think that's behind us.
Okay.
However, now when we've had this market reset, there's a lot of companies that are yet to face, the most extreme challenge of closing down or taking down rounds, but really closing down. And I think that's where this whole fear of failure is going to be crystallized, because there's been so many years of a bull market. A lot of companies that maybe shouldn't be able to raise money managed to raise money, and they kept it going. Now it's going to be very, very different, because there's a lot of companies that are going to go out. They're going to run out of money, and they're not going to be able to raise. And then that's the kind of the moment of failure. And I think we should not look at that as failure. We should just look at that as a really brave attempt of those founders to go out and take a chance on building those companies. Because the worst thing that can happen is that you get these kind of companies that don't go anywhere. You zombie companies that don't grow, and they don't really make money, and they're just there. Because what happens there is that you're locking in talent, you're locking in entrepreneurs. So if those companies shut down, it's actually really, really good relocation of talent, so the team members can go and join a startup that maybe have more chances, and maybe even more importantly, the founder gets released with a lot of experience, and most likely going to start another company and be much better equipped with experience. The other thing that this founder will have is a really, really strong desire to show the world that they can be successful I know it myself because I started a few companies that didn't work out, and that just made me so much stronger and gave me so much more um, will to succeed.
No, that's great. And I guess, you know, you've this idea of kind of these zombie companies or companies that maybe have a lot of runway, maybe haven't reached product market fit. How are you and these are very difficult conversations to have between investor and founder.
Yeah.
How are you advising these companies that maybe find themselves in these low growth situations?
Yeah. I think the reality is that it's not like a general advice. You need to look at case by case basis, right? And there are a few companies where you think, you know what, they still have runway, it's a really strong team, maybe they should kind of mix it up, pivot, roll the dice one more time. And so that's typically would be almost like the first advice, but it's also kind of how much runway you have, because it takes, if you're realizing it's not going to work, okay, then maybe you want to set yourselves up for an acqui-hire.
Yes.
But it takes time to engineer that, so you want to kind of start that really, really early. The most painful situations that you know, founders and investors find themselves in is when the runway, you know, running out of money and you have to kind of, you know, file for bankruptcy, and it's just painful for everyone. So really, you know, evaluate, do you have another chance to roll the dice, or otherwise just kind of try to wrap it up and find, you know, acqui-hire, you know, kind of find a home for the company.
Yes.
But that's also calling it, okay, that was a great attempt, let's go out and start another company.
Great. Actually, so speaking of acqui-hires, you know, we've got in the audience VCs, founders, employees of startups, LPs as well, all of whom are seeing liquidity challenges at different levels. How are you thinking about liquidity and exits in your portfolio?
Sure. It's a big topic, right?
Yeah.
Hindsight is great, and when the market was super hot, you know, I think most of us got carried away, and of course you want to hang on to your successful companies. But what's happened is that a lot before the market turned, there were so many funds went out much quicker to raise more funds. So it's a real strain on the whole LP community, right? Because they don't see money coming back. But I think that's something what we all have to bridge, because, you know, right now maybe not so many liquidity opportunities. There's some IPOs happening right now. It's like, I think the jury's out if that's going to open up the IPO window. But I think eventually, you know, you need to have a little bit of patience. And but for sure, I think all, you know, fund managers and also companies have to think a little bit more about managing liquidity, because, you know, because we have all these kind of paper valuations, and ultimately it's about delivering a cash.
Right.
However, it takes really long time to build successful companies. So I think that is about, if you have companies which are doing really well, both for the team and for investors, take a little bit of money off the table, you know, secondaries along the way.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit about kind of acqui-hire. You know, M&A is, of course, one way of kind of getting to that liquidity. What role, in your opinion, do VCs play, if any, when it comes to M&A in the portfolio? Because we always hear the best companies are bought, not sold. But I wonder kind of what your opinion on that is.
Sure. No, for sure. The best companies get bought, not sold. That's certainly true. So I think that, you know, the VCs have experience, maybe they've seen it many times before, so they can also be helping to advise and can help to create competitive situations that we always try to do. Because if you have a company that is kind of doing so-so, it's not like a rocket ship, and you have a buyer. But if you only have one buyer, it's not going to be, all the shareholders will be disappointed with the outcome. But if you manage to get two potential buyers, you get a different situation. So I think those are the things that, you know, we can help with, also advising founders, and also kind of try to help to, you know, also create a little bit of competitive pressure.
I'd like to ask you about the success cases and the companies that are flying, that are doing really well. Despite kind of the incredible growth that we're seeing in tech in Europe, Europe continues to see what some people are calling this unicorn drain. So the very successful companies moving across the pond to the US, as they're trying to scale and build global leadership. How big of an issue do you think this is, and how do you see this evolving for Europe?
I think it's not a big issue, to be honest with you. I think that what we see is, there's 350 kind of unicorns. I don't think we can call them unicorns, but billion-dollar companies. And I think most companies are staying in Europe. And I think we need to separate a few things, like companies being started in Europe and then where actually they just pack up the bags and just relocate to the US. That's the drain you're talking about. I think that's very few cases. The other one is like founders have ambitions to build global companies, and then of course US is a huge market and you need to address that market. And to do that, you might have to spend a lot of time. Maybe the founder has to spend time in the US to really develop that market. It doesn't mean that the company is leaving. The third issue is listing, right? So you have a company in Europe being very successful to go in public in New York. Doesn't mean that the company is moving to New York. It just happened that they're listing on an electronic marketplace that has New York in its name.
You mentioned that you had your 20-year anniversary of Skype, and the who's who of the recent kind of European tech, they were kind of born out of that experience. So the share of kind of companies that are being started by repeat founders is at an all-time high in Europe, which obviously is a really exciting sign of kind of the developing and the maturing ecosystem. On the flip side, we're also seeing as a result a lot of hype, a lot of FOMO, a lot of big rounds early on. How are you thinking about that dynamic, especially at the very early stage?
Sure. I think there's fewer FOMO, fewer huge rounds over the last year, right, since the reset. So I think that's the good thing with the reset. Then, of course, when you have a new exciting topic like generative AI, then you get that, you get certainly a bit of hype in that area. And there's some of those rounds then becomes really big. There's really no proof points. There's no product. And it's challenging because, do you want to play in those areas or do you want to wait it out? So I think I'm pretty sure that like what happened in generative AI is following the typical hype curve. And we're like on that first up on the hype curve. So certainly we're going to come down.
Got it. And I'd like to draw that out a bit further. So kind of on that note, at the very early stage when companies are starting out, their pre-seed and seed round, like how important do you think it is for them to feel constrained in that early stage?
Yes. I think it's good to be constrained, right? Because it's focus, it makes you focus. So having too much money too early is not great. I think that's, you're building a stronger culture. I mean, an anecdote. So when we started, not Skype, but Kazaa before, it was 2000. Okay, that was like the dot-com crash. And we told ourselves, such a good timing to start now when there's very little money because we can build a really scrappy business. Think about if we had raised money before the crash, we would be fat. And so I think that's what we see today as well. There are certainly a lot of companies that raised too much money before the reset and without product market fit, without real revenues. Those are the companies going to struggle. So I think it's better to start with less.
We have a lot of investors in the room. How do you advise kind of younger investors who haven't lived through many cycles? What should their investor psychology be? Yeah,
so this reset, of course, it was a lot of value that disappeared from people's P&Ls and balance sheets. But it's a really good lesson for not only investors, but also entrepreneurs. If you look around the room here or in most VC firms, probably the majority of investors didn't experience a downturn before. So I think it's a really, really, really good lesson because we all got carried away. We thought that everything would just, go up to the right. Multiples was really, really high. So I think what we learn about this is about, it takes a very long time to build companies, and you have to think that they will go through market cycles, and that companies need to be able to have long-term, whenever there's some kind of exit, that valuation is going to be normalized.
We have time for just one more question. So this is one that's been on the minds of quite a few people that I've spoken to. You've had incredible success in your career with Kazaa, Skype, and now Atomico. What still keeps you motivated and what drives you?
I think we just got started to get going.
Yeah, I know.
So my mission and Atomico's mission is to help to build European tech. And why is that important? Because the future is about tech. It's like maybe in 10, 20 years, we don't really talk about the tech sector because it's just new type of companies that are replacing the old. And it's really important for Europe as a region to be a participant in the world of tech, right? And what we didn't have 20 years ago, we did not have an ecosystem. And I was fortunate enough with Skype we had a first big global company that became a multi-billion-dollar exit. So I found myself in this really fortunate position to also to be a role model, also have the means to do something about it. And back then it was really Silicon Valley was the only place in the world. But there was no reason why we cannot build great companies all around the world, and particularly in Europe, because we have so many good ingredients. We have 4 of the top 10 technical universities, twice as many software developers as US. So that was my mission, and it was great to see now, like Europe as a tech ecosystem, we don't, now we're scaling. There's more companies being started in Europe every year than the US.
Oh.
We're almost on parity with US in terms of early stage funding. And conversion from seed to unicorn is the same in US as in Europe. So I think now we get it going. And I think it's really, really important to continue this journey. And because we're still, when it comes to helping companies to really scale, we're not there yet. So that's one thing, just creating the scale, but also being part of shaping companies to be more ethical, more diverse, more inclusive.
Right.
It's also really an important mission.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.